Greetings to all. Everyone, please note this session is recorded. Again, hello and welcome to the CAPSI, the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment Academic Publishing Workshop Series for Emerging Researchers. If you can hear me, please indicate on the comment section. We are very pleased you could join us today. My name is Tolani Lamini, and I'm the digital publisher at the center, and I will be your facilitator for today's session. I look forward to learning, engaging throughout the session. So today's session is a continuation from our launch, which was held last year. So a brief overview of this series, the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment CAPSI is hosting a series of webinars which focuses on academic publishing. Each webinar looks at a different topic, covering all you need to know about publishing academic articles. The series aims to provide expert advice on a broad range of publishing topics, with many challenges that researchers face when trying to submit their paper to academic journals. We are starting this series to assist and facilitate young researchers through a developmental approach to understand various requirements of journal or academic submission and publication. Furthermore, we anticipate that this series will assist early career researchers to gain insight into editorial processes, decisions, and the opportunity to engage the editors directly. So the speakers will be discussing and giving insights on preparing an academic paper for submission, the peer review process and editorial decisions, discussing production and proofreading, preparing manuscripts for publication and online publishing. So we also thought it will be useful to hear from promising early career researchers' perspective, sharing their experience. So I will also be discussing the challenges and opportunities for new researchers. I want to keep the session as interactive as possible, but also we must stick to the allocated times, and there will be a Q&A session after all the speakers have presented. So if maybe the speakers finish before their time is up, we can take at least one question or two, depending on how much time we have. So there will be other workshops which will be more in depth. So please just feel free to post all your questions, suggestions, and what you would like covered in the upcoming workshops. So without wasting any more time, please let me thank you all for attending, particularly our speakers for agreeing to be part of this session. Now I will introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sara Amin. So Dr. Sara Amin, is a senior lecturer and discipline coordinator of sociology. She completed her PhD in sociology at McGill University and has a background in mathematics and international development. Prior to joining the University of the South Pacific, she worked at the Asian University for Women in Chittagong, Bangladesh, and was the international visiting scholar at Georgetown University. Her research and teaching interests center on sociology of identity, gender, migration, and education. Her research has been funded by various organizations, including the British Academy, the Australian Research Council, Canadian Social Science and Humanities Research Council, the Fulbright Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. She is passionate about teaching, using research to empower students and communities. Sara is a Bangladeshi, Canadian, and she grew up in Thailand. So excuse me, Amin will be presenting on preparing an academic paper for submission. Amin, the floor is yours, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sara Amin, and I'm the Senior Lecturer of Sociology with the School of Law and Social Sciences at the University of the South Pacific. I'll be talking today on a little bit about preparing academic papers and journal submission. I'll be drawing on my experiences as part of the editorial board of the Journal of Sociology, which is the official journal for the Australian Association of Sociology. And I will also draw on my experiences of publishing as well, and responses from editors and so on. So to start us off, so something I found very useful when talking to colleagues as well as postgraduate students, and for myself in thinking about writing and preparing academic writing for publication or conference presentations and so on, is Raynell Connell's work on writing for research. It is a freely available set of mini essays that he's written that provide us, I think, a very reflective way, and at the same time, a very practical way to do writing for the academic space. I'll quote from her work over here. Writing is a specialized form of labor. It is specifically communicative work, so it is useful to apply ideas from the sociology of communication. Among other things, this encourages us to think of the audience for any piece of writing, how that audience is reached, and what the writing does for its readers. It is very important for researchers to think about who they're writing to, as that awareness shapes the writing itself. And as we'll see today as I do my presentation, that there is this relationship between what you're writing and who you're writing to, and it's an iterative, dynamic kind of process. And being conscious about that is very important, I think, in preparing a piece of work for a specific journal. Writing for research is a specific form of also communication, and that too needs attention. It is part of a collective process of making knowledge. So it is also helpful to apply ideas from the sociology of intellectuals and the sociology of knowledge, as that field is being reshaped in post-colonial time, especially with questions about the knowledge production process and the power dynamics in it, the expectations that are there that might be disadvantaging or privileging for certain ways of speaking, certain ways of writing, certain ways of communicating. And so, and it's also important to think through that a writer's relations with previous and future workers in the same domain is also important, that when you're writing to and for, in some sense, those that are around you, those that might evaluate you, those that you would want to see your work, hear your work, listen to your work. And so thinking about that also will shape your writing. And so are the epistemes and knowledge frameworks to which the work relates. And paying attention to, for example, a journal's epistemological framing or theoretical underpinnings or inclinations become really important in considering who do you want your work to be in conversation with. And that's also embedded in the literature that you engage with in your writing, but also kind of thinking about the journal itself. And not just the literature around per se, because some of the choices you make for the literature will also be influenced by the spaces in which you want to or choose to publish in. With that background, we can also look at writing for research not as a great mystery, but as an understandable labor process. Different genres within this labor process involve different audiences and styles, and like other forms of labor, writing involves skills that can be learned and refined. And like other forms of labor, it also involves a creative and purposive dimension, and it is all the better for reflection and discussion. And I think it's really important to keep these ideas very central in the writing process, because it's with all the with all the publisher perish kind of pressures and so on, we get caught in the doing without kind of looking at where the doing is embedded, and to be able to do the work that will lead to kind of the outputs and the outcomes that you want. I think getting a more holistic kind of awareness of the writing process itself becomes very helpful in that in these goals and aspirations. So, in terms of going down to how to write a journal article and practical steps, Connell breaks it down into the following kind of steps. Sorry, the epitome, the argument, the first draft, the revision, the presentation of your paper, and the publication. I will talk about some of those other elements as we go through, but one of the things that I find that Connell kind of puts to the front, and it is something that's often missing when we talk about in writing workshops and so on, is what she calls the epitome, which she describes as kind of the summary of your findings, um, the the so what in some sense of your research that you're trying to um, share, and really kind of thinking through over here, and she suggests, for example, being able to put this down in one page, either by handwriting or by typing, but kind of really thinking through the connections, the linkages of what your findings really mean, what questions are they raising, what are the statistical significance if you're doing quantitative work that of relationships or variables that you want to highlight, what are the stories if you're working with qualitative data, what are the stories that are kind of core to showing what you want to argue. So really getting a sense of that, but in a very kind of constrained space, so to speak, so that it helps you focus in on what do you want to really say. And in some sense, without clarity on that, the other elements become really hard to write. So spending time on that particular this particular step of really identifying what do you want to really say from this piece of research or for this component of research? What is the really the goal of this? How does it relate to kind of what you know about the field or the area? What questions does it raise? What's the key, the most interesting data story you can tell around it, and being able to put down within the limits of, let's say, one page, that becomes really central in helping us kind of like have a have a good sense of what you want to say, what we want to say. And by doing that, it gives us then a space to start looking at also where do you want to say it, okay, and doing the rest of it. Um, so I like to think of the entire preparing for the an academic paper process as this cycle and feedback and back and forth between these questions of what do I want to say, why does it matter, where do I want to say it, how do I say it, where have others said this, and how have others said this. And the where part is important in both identifying journals as well as identifying the audience, as well as identifying the disciplines, and the disciplinary spaces in which you want your work to be be part of. And the how do I say it, and how others have said it, in some sense requires learning the discursive practices of a particular field or area or field or discipline or area of studies, and learning kind of the tricks around it, learning kind of the styles, the language around it, because these things do come back in how editors and reviewers are going to be reading your work. Uh, and and this is not to say you have to fit in exactly into a particular template. But when you have clarity on what you want to say and why does it matter, then thinking about these other questions allows you to be more aware of if you are challenging certain understandings or norms or styles, and then being able to be explicit about why you're challenging it and why is it important to do it differently, for example. So these kinds of, and this is also where post-colonial questions about the knowledge production process itself can become important. But the more you're able to anticipate these issues or these questions to maybe how you're preparing your work or how you're doing it, the more you can prepare also the arguments, or the sometimes many journals give you the space to also provide a cover letter that explains the importance of the work or some choices that you've made about the work. And those kinds of narratives allow facilitate it for editors and reviewers to place your work, to situate it, to relate it, and to understand what you're trying to do. So keeping those things in mind and these questions in mind are really useful, I think, and thinking of them in this relational, cyclical way in the writing process is helpful in trying to prepare a work that is received and read in a way that is understood for what you're trying to do with it. So, in these questions of what do I want to say and where do I want to say it, like I think I've iterated this earlier on, in terms of what do I want to say, it's really important that you're able to identify the key argument that you want to make. Often, one of the things that uh, editors will often reject right off the board is when an article is trying to do too much, when there are too many arguments. And sometimes this is the hardest when we're going from a dissertation into and trying to publish elements of our dissertation. We kind of have the big picture of our dissertation, but then we need to, in our articles, actually often narrow it down to something very focused, very specific. And because there's in some ways very limited space, and you need to be able to do everything to build it and show it, and as a result you want the key argument to be a very focused, very precise point that you're trying to make, and so in some sense you need to think of the larger body of work that you're working with in this, and an article being kind of a step towards other arguments as well. Identify what is the story that you want to tell. Why does it matter that it's said? Why does this argument matter? The more clarity you have on that, the easier it is to write the paper, and the easier it is to figure out where you want to say it. Because when you're looking at trying to make choices about where you want to publish, what kinds of arguments are related to your research area, are made in the journal or journals that you're looking for, is an important question. So if you're looking at a few journals and then seeing what types of arguments about your topic are being made in that journal becomes really central in trying to figure out how do I fit into this? Where does my argument fit into what has been said in this journal related to this larger topic? How does your paper story speak to the aims and the scopes of the journal? You especially, I think it's important, I think, to pay attention to the journal's theoretical takes. The journals can be political spaces. Some journals, which are, you know, journals will have methodological, epistemological, and theoretical trends or biases, so to speak, and paying attention to that is important, because if your research or your way of doing it is not aligned to those elements, then it's highly possible that it will not be seen as appropriate for the journal. Um, and and not just the journal's theoretical lens, but also its aims and scope. So, for example, for a long time, the Journal of Sociology that I was part of had been very focused on basically Australia and a little bit of New Zealand and so on. But they took a very explicit kind of decision with the last editorial board, and that has continued with the current, to make it much more an international focus. And so when it had a more Australia focus, it would have not made sense to try to publish in a journal like that. So just even those kinds of things become important, even if it's called something that seems very inclusive. It might not be in the way it's working, and for that, it's also really good to look at the editorial board's research areas, where they're from, what disciplines they're involved in, what topics they are, because that will also give you a sense of the networks that they reach out for when they get reviewers, and those types of network-based relationships will tend to also highlight the political, the theoretical, the expectations, the way of writing, and so on that's out there, the types of questions that reviewers might pose. So these types of things are important questions to ask yourself in choosing where do you want to say it, and obviously the answers to that will shape the way you write your paper as well, or how you anticipate the criticisms or questions that may come. um, some other things to think about that sometimes we forget when we're starting off, but it's important in a very practical and important way, especially given how academic institutions have been working, is looking at how do your institutions evaluate that journal. If your institution basically doesn't value a particular journal that you want to publish in, you need to think about, is it worth it for me to do this in this particular journal, or should I look for somewhere else? And then sometimes that can be in tension with how your own discipline evaluates that journal. So maybe sociology, maybe this journal is really important for social movements, but is not highly valued by the university that you work for. When that happens, what are you going to do? And I think those come back to then thinking about the question of your current and future workers, like Connell was saying. What are your plans for who again who you want to be reading your work, who you want to be citing your work, because sometimes you might want to maybe for the short run, publishing in an journal that is ranked highly might work against you, in the sense that that the people that you're interested in having a conversation with, they're not reading that journal that much. So these are, and that can affect also your citations and your impact, and which then are other things institutions use to measure you. So thinking about these things seriously and consciously, I think, has become important in the preparation of the academic paper process. Other things to keep in mind: journals can have very varied times in how long it takes for a paper that you send and submit, and a decision around it, and that's made around it, and then the publication time itself. There's more and more different types of databases and platforms that are developing to try to give us a better sense of what's there for that. Some journals will have this kind of information on their own websites, but others won't. So looking for that information, or finding out if you know someone who's published in that journal, to find out how long it took. These things can make a big difference in thinking through how long your paper might get stuck in a place, and also learning about how many reviewers are often need, like what are the rules about the number of reviewers. Some journals, for example, require 5 reviewers, other journals required 1, other journals require 2. So when these kinds of things are there, it's important to it makes a difference in the length of time and as well as the complexity of dealing with revisions or the likelihood of rejections and so on. Looking at also how often does the journal publish? Do articles get published only do articles get published online is another new thing that's important. And it allows a faster turnaround time, so to speak, at least at the publication point. And keeping an eye out for call for papers for special issues, because those often help you figure out the first set of questions about where you want to say it and what are the theoretical, epistemological, and and political dynamics involved in it. Those special issues can be quite useful for kind of solving those questions, and getting more support, at least from the editors at the beginning of it. Just another thing, sometimes editors will right away reject a paper saying that it doesn't fit the aims or scopes of the journal or that it's not ready, before they send it out even to the reviewers. There can be a good thing for that in that it doesn't get stuck for a long time, but it can be also helpful when you get that kind of a response to write back to ask for some guidance or advice, or sometimes to challenge it and ask, if you think the argument that's being made doesn't make sense, because then in most journals there's an obligation to then send it out to reviewers as well. So these are things to keep in mind as well. In these final couple of slides, the question comes down then to how do I say it? And Connell, in the paper that I mentioned, and the link was up there, is goes through kind of the other kind of practical steps around it. But I think some key questions around this is, paying specially attention to the evidence of the argument that you're making and the quality of your methodology and data analysis, um, and being able to clearly identify what are your findings, and how you're going to create a good story about your findings. These sometimes some of the often we get papers that have spent quite a bit of time on the literature, on the conceptualizations and so on, but often then the actual data or evidence to show the argument that the author or authors want to make, that's often missing, or not well developed. And when that's not there, there is a greater worry on the part of reviewers and editors that the paper might not be salvageable, so to speak. Often when the methods, the data and the quality of the methodology and the analysis and the story that's being told is strong, but the literature, the theoretical framing might need more work, there's actually a greater chance that you'll get more reviewers guiding you or editors guiding you towards where how to frame it, than if it's the other way around. So paying attention to this and really being able to bring the evidence to your argument out, is very, very important. And then it is important to be able to link your work to, like, when you're writing it about the debates, theories, and stories that your paper speaks to, that it challenges. And like we said earlier, the where of this matters as well, whether it's disciplinary or journal based as well as audience based. And it's important to kind of think through the recent events in these debates. Sometimes we tend to keep using the body that we know or that we engaged with during our dissertation, or after a few years, the work that we've become comfortable with, and we stop in some sense following maybe other debates that are taking place in this space or in the space that you're engaging with. Being able to show your awareness of it and linking your work to what it's saying in relation to these recent developments, is very important, because often reviewers will kind of see these gaps or identify these gaps. And the other thing to remember is that, especially when we're and this is about thinking about your audience again, but when we're preparing a paper for more wider disciplinary journals like Journal of Sociology or the Anthropological Journal of American Anthropology, the Journal of British Sociology, or so to speak, or just broad-based ones, it's going to be important to provide context. Um, and this is particularly important because I think for most of us as scholars locate doing research and working in the global south, that many of the reviewers that are brought into the reviewers process are mainly located still in the global north, are mainly familiar, and this is in part because of what the editorial teams of journals often look like, that they're mainly familiar with northern context, northern stories, northern histories, and so a lot of what we might be writing about might be unfamiliar. And so providing enough contextual information, knowledge around it becomes really important. And this goes back to also as well kind of highlighting the debates, theories, and stories in this context, in the context that you're writing from. And I think without that kind of explicit engagement with the context that you're writing from and with, you can lose the editors or the reviewers, and it can be by some reviewers misunderstood, misinterpreted, and this is why. Again, thinking through and doing some research around who the editorial board is and therefore how much context you might need to provide. And then at the very end, I mean, these are things that are in some sense obvious, but important to keep in mind is take the instructions for authors that are there, especially in relation to word limits and overall clarity in writing. Most journals expect some form of proofreading done and some uh, standard level of lack of errors grammatically and things like that. Some journals are starting to provide kind of services around this, but it's often pay for services. And there's a couple of journals, for example, in Latin America, that have taken a very explicit stand on this because they recognize the power dynamics and power inequalities that this can reproduce in knowledge production. So they are providing very concerted efforts and free services for proofreading, for the clarity of writing in a technical sense, so to speak. So these are, but most journals won't. So you'll have to kind of think through, are there people you can ask help from? It's always a good idea to get your paper read by several colleagues that you trust to give you constructive feedback and guidance. Um, Sometimes reading a paper to those that are not in the discipline can be helpful. It can help us to write more clearly. Do pay attention to the way that quantitative versus qualitative versus mixed methods and theoretical and review papers are structured in the journal that you're writing in, because generally using those templates and then playing around with it, but generally using those templates makes it easier to both for the reviewers and editors to follow, as well as for you to kind of think through how you want to say something. Um, it's becoming more and more common for multiple reasons and pushes to write collaboratively, and this can help in the writing process a lot. It can make it a more explicit collective experience, and it can make the different knowledge and expertise that people bring to the writing process into one place. But I think there's some things to keep in mind when writing collaboratively as well. One, probably the most important, is write with people who respect you and who you trust. You don't want your work to be devalued or distorted or taken advantage of. But in terms of the other thing to be careful about is, does it read like one piece of writing versus does it read like three different people wrote three different sections? And again, I mean, the more shared the discursive practices become, I guess the less our voices come through. So it can work, but kind of while different people can take charge of different sections, then kind of redistributing that work in the revision process can be very important and helpful, to make it sound like, because if it doesn't sound like one coherent piece when you're working with other people, then it's again something that reviewers and editors will obviously point to. And I think I've gone over my time by quite a bit, so I'll stop here. But I would like to emphasize that the key to preparing an academic paper for publication, I think, is first really thinking about what you want to say it, what are the evidence that what evidence will you use to make that argument, and then who do you want to be listening to your argument, and what do they tend to say, and then being able to anticipate in some sense what they might ask or say, to then be able to incorporate that into the way you build your argument. I think those are the things that really matter, and when those things are put together put together in a coherent way, in an organized way that tells a clear, focused story, basically, it's it's very likely that you will be able to get the the acceptance to a journal. But again, paying attention to the journal's editorial board, its aims and scopes, its leanings in theory and methodology and so on, and its geographical or social kind of missions will be important. So I hope that will be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amin, and I'm really sorry about your situation. Hopefully your son feels better, and thank you very much for your time. And so I think maybe let's move on to our second speaker, and by all means, I guess you'll have as much time as one man could need to do your presentation. So our second speaker is Dr. Jones, Odei-Mensah. Dr. Jones is an associate professor of economics and finance at the Wits Business School, with many years of experience in economics and finance research and stints as a practitioner, policy and consulting roles. Professor Odei-Mensah's research has contributed to academic and policy debates on many fronts, including financial stability, microprudential policy formulation, capital market development and financial integration, fiscal deficit management, economic growth, policy stabilization. He has published extensively in top-tier journals such as Economic Modeling, Research in International Business and Finance, Quarterly Review of Economics and Finance, Journal of Property Investment and Finance, African Development Review, and Economic Research. In recognition of his research impact, National Research Foundation, NRF, awarded him a Y2 rating. He consults with multilateral organizations such as the African Export-Import Bank and African Union, the multinational professional services networks such as KPMG, think tanks such as the African Center for Economic Transformation. He serves as a board member on a few organizations, including the AREF Consult and Nile Valley Group. He is a member of the advisory board and an editor of several leading economic and finance outlets, including the African Review of Economic and Finance and Ghanaian Journal Economics, the Journal of African Political Economy and Development. He grew up in Accra and spent some years in Southeast Asia, and now lives in Johannesburg. In his spare times, he enjoys choral music. So Dr. Jones will discuss the peer review processes and editorial decisions. over to you, Dr. Jones. You also have 15 minutes. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Folani. That's quite a long intro about me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to share a few experiences with you. And as Holani mentioned, I'll be talking to you about this peer review process, understanding it, what it means, and particularly for emerging researchers, how to overcome the hurdles that usually comes along with it. Now, when we hear about peer review, this is what typically comes to mind. So you've gone through all the hassle and the struggle and the challenges of writing a paper, and you want the paper to be published. But there are a lot of hurdles that you must navigate. And if you are successful, then your paper will be accepted and published at the end of the race. If you are not successful midway, you can be kicked out, or sometimes even right up front, your paper could be rejected. So I just want to briefly explain what the peer review process is all about. Now, when we talk about the peer review process, essentially, we are looking at the process of subjecting your work, or if you're an author, your scholarly work, your ideas, to the scrutiny of others. We want others to scrutinize it, and not just any group of people or bunch of people, but experts in the field, so that the ideas that eventually get published, we will be sure are of high quality and indeed having improved based on suggestions given by these expert reviewers. Now, usually there are different types of peer review processes. The types of peer review that a journal uses will depend on the nature of the discipline and other factors. But there is one common aspect of all the models that are out there, which is that there should be transparency in the way the review is carried out. Now, there are three common ones, and of course, there are several others, but the three common types of peer review processes that we have out there are the single blind. When we say single blind, essentially, what it means is that the reviewer knows the name of the authors, but the authors do not know who reviewed their manuscript. So if you submit your paper to a journal, and the journal's policy is to have a single blind, it means whoever reviews your paper will know who you are, because your name will be out there, your name will be on the paper, but you will not know who reviewed the paper. And this anonymity of the reviewer allows them to be impartial, and it protects them from being influenced by the authors. Now, there is a second type, which is the double blind. And this is the case where both the reviewer and the author do not know each other. The advantage of this model are that the author anonymity, in a way, limits the possibility of bias. And that bias sometimes could be based on maybe the author's own academic status, their publication record, maybe the institution they come from, even the agenda, or sometimes even the country of origin. And having this double blind review is a way of ensuring that that bias is not supported in there, it's ruled out. Now, when we talk about the open peer review, it's simply a collective term for many models which have been created to provide more transparency during and after the review process. And the most common example of the open review is when both the reviewer and the author recognize each other during the review process. So the authors know who the reviewers are, and the reviewers know who the authors are. If the manuscript is accepted, the named reviewer reports are also published alongside the article, and the author's response to the reviewer is also published. So broadly, these are the three main categories. Now let's get to the main aspect. Who are typically the reviewers? Now, when we talk about peer reviews, we are not referring to strangers or people who do not come from Earth. We are referring to people who are in the field in which you are writing your paper. So if you're in economics and you're specialized in a certain area of economics, you may not be the only one who is specializing and writing papers in that area. There could be several others. And any of these several others could be a peer review. It could be a mixture of young, old. So you can have a broad range of people who, based on their expertise, will be qualified to review your paper. And from experience, often the young reviewers are the most responsive, and they deliver some of the best quality reviews, though this is not always the case. Now, for emerging researchers, I think you would want to, or you may want to understand how the entire review process works. And so what I have here is simply a representation of the peer review process. This is not a definitive approach used by every journal, but it defines, or it gives us the most common route that papers go through when they are submitted to a journal. And I'll take my time to unpack each step and what happens at each step and what you can do to perhaps sail through the challenges identified at each step. So let's begin with step one. The peer review process only begins when you, as an author or a researcher, has completed a research. And once you complete that research study, you're going to write a manuscript. That manuscript is going to describe things like the purpose of the paper, the experimental design, the results, the conclusion of the study. So once you have done this, you're going to look for a suitable journal and submit your manuscript to that suitable journal. That journal perhaps will be one that specializes in the relevant field. So for me, who, for instance, writes on market co-movement, I'll be looking for papers, journals which publishes papers similar to what I have written. And at this stage, I mean, this is the most crucial stage. At this stage, the journal editor receives your paper. So when you submit, it will typically land on the desk of the editor-in-chief or the managing editor of the journal, who is going to now screen the paper. So if you recall the first image which I showed you, and I'm going to take you back briefly, the picture which I showed you earlier, you will see the guy with a sword. Take it as he being the editor-in-chief or the managing editor or the handling editor of the journal. Once you submit a paper, it will land on his desk. And the journal editor is going to now review the paper to ensure that the subject matter is in line with that of the journal. So if your work is about stock market co-movement, and you decide to submit it to, say, a journal which publishes microeconomic stuff, or a journal which publishes sociology stuff, one, you know you've shot yourself in the foot. There is that misalignment, okay? So you need to know the scope of the journal. And here the editor-in-chief or the managing editor is going to ensure that your work indeed aligns with that of the journal, what the journal scope is. It fits the editorial platform. And here, fitting the editorial platform simply means, in terms of word count, if the journal requires maximum 8,000 words, you are not submitting 12,000 words to them. If they require their references to be done in a certain style, let's say APA, we are not sending them Harvard. If they require you to submit cover letters, you are not ignoring that. Or maybe they want your tables to be numbered in a certain way and arranged in a separate file. You are fulfilling all of those conditions. So a few papers, very few papers pass this initial condition. And there are a lot of reasons why this is the case. Sometimes, as I alluded to earlier, articles are simply sent to the wrong journal. And sometimes even the style of the paper, it's not written in the form of a journal article, but sometimes perhaps too journalistic. Or maybe you simply take a chapter of your thesis and submit it with the hope that reviewers are going to tell you, rearrange it this way. No, it will be rejected right at the onset by the editor-in-chief. So you need to take some of these reasons into consideration. The paper may be too long, the style of writing may be very bad, grammar, punctuation, and sometimes it fails to say anything of significance. It makes no contribution to the subject or simply states the obvious at tedious length. So some of these reasons may result in a rejection right at the desk of the editor-in-chief or the managing editor. Now, if your paper passes this hurdle, okay, it will then go through the peer review process. If the editor feels that it sufficiently meets the requirements, but is written by a credible source, it will then be taken through the peer review process. And it is the responsibility of the editor here to select the most appropriate manuscript for the journal. So they have to make sure that all of these criteria are fulfilled. They have to ensure that the review is conducted in a fair and timely manner and effectively as well. And they also have to ensure that there are no conflicts of interest when it comes to the entire peer review process. Just an example of what I said about knowing the scope of a journal. Every journal has an about this journal page, and it's up to you as the author who wants to or desires to publish in that journal to read that about page carefully. In there, they're going to tell you what they publish and what they do not publish. So this is an example from the African Review of Economics and Finance, of which I'm the editor, and we clearly spell out what we are going to publish and what we are not going to publish. A second example is from economic modeling. And here again, you can see the journal clearly spells out what types of work it publishes and what it doesn't publish. So you need to know this as an author before you submit a paper to them, else you risk being desk rejected. Now, let's suppose you've passed the hurdle of the editor-in-chief and your paper has now been sent to reviewers. Reviewers are going to look at 4 critical things here, typically. Mostly they're going to consider whether the research question is important, it's original, they may also want to look at the structure of the paper itself, whether it's logical, whether there is proper alignment. What does an abstract say? What does the introduction say? What does the methodology say? The title of the paper itself, okay? So for instance, you may want to have a title which is descriptive enough. It is clear, it is concise, so that when someone reads the title of the paper, they know what this paper is about, okay? You don't confuse your reviewers. The abstract must be sufficiently informative. And the content of the abstract itself should be consistent with the rest of the paper. So you don't want to present something in the abstract, which when people read the paper later, they get a different story. You would have misled your review, and sometimes this could lead to a rejection. You come to the meat of the paper itself, starting with the introduction, okay? Introduction, you may want to present the research question in the context of, for instance, what is already known about the topic, in order to identify why that research question is being studied and whether it's indeed of interest, it's properly motivated. The reviewer is going to look at something like your method section. And here you would want your methods to be detailed enough. And when someone reads a method, they should be able to replicate what you say you've done by simply reading your methods. Sometimes even the language in which the method is written. And mostly here we encourage you to write in the past tense. The reviewer is going to look at all of this and ensure that the method is detailed enough. A section like the results, here again, most reviewers are going to look for sufficient details. The results are credible. The text in the result is consistent with the information presented in the tables and figures. So you give us tables and figures, which maybe tells us you've run a regression. The coefficient or the beta that you're expecting is indeed positive, but maybe it's not statistically significant. But you're drawing meanings as if it is statistically significant, okay? So that consistency between what is in the tables and figures and the text is all going to be looked at. Even table captions should be appropriate, both contextually and in length. And then sections like the discussion. Here, reviewers are going to look at all of that. And so you would want your paper to be written in a very sweet way, in a convincing way. Now, what happens after the reviewer has read your paper? There are 3 common recommendations from peer reviewer reports. In very rare instances, they are going to tell you, well, the paper should be accepted. This is so rare. I have hardly come across it, and none of the papers I've published has received this recommendation before, that the reviewer simply says the paper should be accepted. If you're lucky, then the paper simply goes into production and gets published. Now, at the other extreme is having your paper rejected. And here, there'll be reasons for rejection. The reviewer's job is to write a detailed report, although sometimes you have reviewers who are not detailed enough. They give you something very scanty, and the editor also, based on that, may simply reject your paper. When this happens, I usually tell people that all is not lost. It doesn't mean your work belongs to the bin. You simply have to rework it and try another journal. Now, what we mostly look out for is a revise and resubmit decision. And this is what you would want to receive after your paper has gone through peer review, to be told that it needs revisions, make revisions, sometimes minor revisions, sometimes major revisions. And here you're going to make the revisions as an author. And once you've made all those revisions, you send the paper back to the editor. The editor assesses your revision and how you've responded to reviewer comments. If need be, the paper will be sent back to the reviewer again to indeed satisfy the editor that the comments have been appropriately addressed and the paper has been restructured in a way that is logical and indeed makes contribution to the field in which it's supposed to belong. So in the end, the manuscript can be accepted or may be accepted after the revision, or it can even be rejected after the revision. And in all of this, the editor is going to be the mediator between the author and the referee. So simply, this is how the peer review process works. In the interest of time, I'm going to stop here. And I think when we come to the Q&A, I'll be happy to address any other questions that you may have around the peer review process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jones, for a very illuminating and engaging presentation. So I think we still maybe will take one question from the audience. Maybe also just something to add to the questions while I look through the comments. You mentioned that there's, you spoke about types of peer reviews, journal, double blind, single blind, journal requirement, the scope, the structure of the paper, and the reviewers' evaluation criteria. So it seems that I have just one specific question around that. It seems that the majority of reviewers who show willingness to take reviews, it's young researchers, as you pointed out. People are still trying to climb, make their name in the academic space. So let's say maybe your paper is it's very specific, and you want to submit to a specific journal, like for instance, some fields like philanthropy, for instance, there aren't many avenues, to where you can send your paper for consideration. So let's say you get a rejection, you've gone through the submission, the peer review, and then your paper is outright, rejected with a very, substantial reviewer comments, but you feel that you deserve a second chance or whatever reason. How do you address that process of maybe initiating a rebuttal or whatever other means that are available for authors?
Well, thank you for that insightful comment, Holani. Usually when editors make decisions on manuscripts, it's considered final. And I tell my students, I tell my co-authors that you don't go fighting editors once they have made comments, because it's a small world. You never know where your next paper is going to land. And so when such rejections come, as I mentioned out, the rejections always come with reasons. So maybe they are rejecting your paper because, quote unquote, they will tell you it's not making an earth-shattering contribution. It simply means your paper doesn't sell, it doesn't fly. So how do you retell the story for the paper to fly? Sometimes they doubt the quality of the data that you use. And so it's up to you to now revise the paper in a way that is very clear enough, well motivated, with clear results and outcomes which are convincing. But the fact that it's been rejected by a particular journal means you can't resubmit the same paper to that same journal even after you have made a revision. You simply have to move on and look for a different journal which also publishes similar issues. It becomes difficult if the field is quite narrow and you have very limited choices, but that is how things work. That is the nature of the game. Once you have a rejection, you don't send the revised paper to that same journal again. You look for another journal avenue to publish it.
Thank you very much, Dr. for your answers. So I will take just one question from the audience, and this is from Emmanuel. Do authors have to pay for having their papers published, or writers publish for free in journals?
Okay, so it depends on which journal you're publishing in. Some journals do not charge a penny. For instance, the African Review of Economics and Finance, submission, publishing, there is no single fee paid for by the author. Now, some journals, even the top journals, mostly these days are taking submission fees. And these submission fees for administrative purposes, they may be prohibitive. But the rule is that, well, you never pay for submission fee out of pocket. That is why you find yourself within an institution, and you may want to approach your institution to support the journal publication fee. It can go as high as $200. simply for submitting, and there is no refund once your paper is rejected. So you have to make sure whatever you are sending to that journal is indeed having a high chance of making the cut, else you risk losing your money. There are several other journals which do not charge a penny. And when you go through the DHET approved list of journals, you find several of such.
Thank you very much, Dr. Everyone, please, we wanted to make this session as interactive as possible, but we can only take so many questions. So please just reserve your questions until the question and answer session that will be right at the end of this webinar. So we will move on to our third speaker. And our third speaker is Dr. Fick, who is a managing editor of the South African Journal of Science, the Journal of the Academy of Science of South Africa, ASSAF, whose vision is to publish and promote the widest diversity of excellent South African research, local and global academic communities, and to inform policymakers and the public. He has a PhD in physiology from the University of Wits, and is a member of the Professional Editors Guild. Welcome, Dr. Fick. Please, Dr. Fick will be presenting on production and proofreading, preparing manuscripts for publication and online publishing. Over to you, Dr. Fick.
Thank you, Kalani, and good afternoon to everyone. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to talk on journal production and publication this afternoon. I'm actually going to turn my video off because my camera is kind of doing its own thing and you can't see me anyway. Sorry, I'll fix that now. So I'm sure we can all agree that this part of the publishing journey is the best part because you know what the outcome is going to be and you know that it's not going to be a rejection letter. But that doesn't mean that, sorry, I'm just trying to change my slides. That doesn't mean that the acceptance letter is the end of the journey or the end of the race, as Dr. Jones said. There's still a little bit before you get to the finish line and you actually publish that article. And after all the hard work of writing and rewriting and revising and going through the peer review, you want to make sure that your paper is showcased in the best way possible and that people will be able to find it and be able to read it. So the simplest way I can describe the production process is that it starts with the normally MS Word version that you wrote and submitted and that was peer reviewed, and it turns that version into a final version that is published. I think I have a delay with changing my slides. Sorry, everyone. I'm just going to share that version, at least then I can move along.
No problem, Doc. Please take your time.
Sorry. So what is the purpose of the production process? It's to optimize the readability of your paper, the clarity of the text, the placement of the figures, the formatting of the tables. and to ensure a complete and publish-ready version that will be findable, searchable, and accessible to be read. This means all the metadata are included, things like the author's names, the keywords, the DOI, and that it's included in a format that is machine readable and therefore can be searchable. So the outputs of the process will be the metadata, those data that describe your paper, the authors, the keywords, the abstract. And often these are, as Dr. Jones explained, if it's a double-blind peer review, this information is removed. So you want to make sure that it's all included before you carry on. And then also the files that you're going to publish. So this depends a little bit on your paper and mostly on the journal, but usually it will be a PDF file. Sometimes it might include an HTML or an EPUB file. There might be supplementary files for your paper, or even video or audio files. At this point, I just want to make a quick disclaimer. What I'm going to talk about is the process that we follow at the South African Journal of Science, which is a very typical process, but there are differences in what and how different journals do things. So I would explain the production process in 5 steps. The first step is the completeness check. This is to make sure that you have everything in hand that you need in order to produce a final published version from the version that was submitted and reviewed. Making sure you've got all the co-authors' names, the affiliations are correct. If there was perhaps a revision to the title, that you're using the correct title, that the keywords and the abstracts are in the correct format, because these are very important to be able to make your article searchable for people searching the literature. You want them to be able to find the article. To make sure all figures mentioned are included. If you've cited 60 references, are there 60 references in your reference list? To make sure you've acknowledged your funding bodies, and then also information that is best practice in journal publishing. Things like the submitted date and accepted date of the manuscript. Things like the author's contributions and any competing interests of the authors. And then very importantly also, the publisher needs to ensure they have a license to publish your work. For some journals, you'll be asked to transfer the copyright of your paper to the publisher in order for them to publish. The next step is a formatting step, making sure the references are in the correct style, that you follow the journal's house style, that heading levels and subheadings are indicated correctly, that all the figures and tables have captions, and then a more in-depth copy editing step. That's looking critically at the content to make sure there's no typographical or grammatical errors, to make sure, as Dr. Jones mentioned, that each section is written in the correct tense, to make sure that the language is clear, that the paper is logical, that all the figures are legible, and if there are ethics, have you reported the ethics clearance? If you need permission to reuse any figures that are copyrighted, have you included those permissions? And this step normally occurs with the copy editor and the author working closely together to fine-tune all those things. At the bottom is just an example of a figure, just to show that if you submit a figure that is very small, when during the production phase that figure is reduced to be able to fit into the journal format, you won't be able to read the labels, the numbers that appear there, you won't be able to read those. Likewise, if you submit a very small figure and it needs to be enlarged to fit the journal format, if it's not of a sufficient resolution, then it will pixelate. So these are things hopefully authors check before they submit the paper, but oftentimes it's only during copy editing that we can get higher resolution figures and make sure that the presentation is optimal. The next step is layout or typesetting, and this basically is converting the document that was submitted in Word or LaTeX into the formats that you want to print. So typically for most journals, a PDF format and whatever other format. And this is done either by a typesetter, or some journals are lucky enough to have software that does at least the initial steps for them. And here's just to show you how formatting and typesetting can help to make a table more readable. By using spacing and shading appropriately, the table becomes more understandable. You can see the relationships between the columns and rows much more easily. And then the final step is proofreading. And that means you have to check every format, make sure that everything is included, you haven't accidentally left out a figure, the spacing is correct, everything reduced or enlarged in size is legible, you haven't lost formatting with your symbols, your italics, all the links work, you don't have broken links in your paper. And this is normally a journal proofreader, and then also the author will proofread a final version. And once all 5 steps are completed, then you have an article or at least files that are ready to publish. And then this slide also just shows you how each step contributes to making the final article searchable, readable, accessible. So this shows a PDF file ready for publishing. This is the sort of print-friendly traditional version that we still very much depend on. This is the same article in an EPUB format. EPUB formats are generally more accessible for screen readers, for people who are visually impaired, and they're also much more responsive to the size of the screen. So the text will adapt to the size. If you're reading it on your phone or your iPad, you don't have to scroll up and scroll down to read it. And then this is an example of an HTML. The HTML format is very web friendly, it's interactive. You can click on the links and the tables and figures will open. And then finally, an XML format, you can see it's not people friendly, it is a machine readable format. So now we have our files ready to publish. We have to ensure that the metadata is entered correctly and captured in the right fields. And this screen just sort of shows the publisher version of our website and how we enter the metadata and what metadata is included, the title, the abstract, the contributors or authors, the metadata like the article type, the DOI, the galleys are the files, the PDF and EPUB, what issue this article is going to be assigned to, and then also funding data. And this feeds into a Crossref's funding database, and once entered in the correct fields, this information can be exported through we use OJS as a content management system, and there is a plugin that can export this information to those third parties, and they can also update their databases and know that this article was cited this funding body. So once that information is entered in the background, we then click publish, and this is what everybody can see on our website, the same information published and searchable. You can see the file types that we publish on the right side. There's a supplementary file for this article, the author's names, the affiliations, the ORCID IDs, the DOI of the article, the keywords, the abstract, the funding information at the bottom, and then also a machine readable license. That's the license we publish the author's articles under. They retain their copyright. So some of this information, as I said, is exported directly to third parties like ORCID and Crossref. But it doesn't stop there. The article's published, we're not done yet. We still need to disseminate to the journal subscribers, to any indexers and harvesters that we have agreements with, and that makes the article more discoverable. And it informs those funders and Google Scholar, ORCID, that this article has been published. It updates the author's profile on those platforms. And then we also want to share the article on social media, make it more discoverable. The authors can also share on their social media. We include a media release. And then finally, we also make sure the article is preserved. And this is through a dark archive on the web. So it's kind of like a worst case scenario. If our website crashes, if we lose all our backups, then we still have a version and all is not lost. These are just some examples of the indexes and harvesters that we work with that may be known to you. And then also the same paper that we published then appears afterwards on their own platforms and is discoverable by more people. So we often hear from authors, why does it take so long? And I hope that having shown you the process, that you understand a little bit of why it does take the time it takes. But how can you as an author ensure that that process is faster and smoother? Always follow the journal's guidelines, word limits, reference style, use a reference manager where you can, it does help, but also make sure that when you add in references to your reference library that you're including all the details. If you don't include the details, then it can't give those details back to you and your reference list will be incomplete. Ensure you include all the metadata, especially co-authors details. Very often we get papers with, they just didn't add the co-authors at the time because they wanted to submit in a hurry. That information is very important. Make sure you spell your co-authors' names correctly. And then if your paper requires ethical clearance or your research required ethical clearance, make sure you provide that information in the paper and any copyright permissions you may need. And then ensure that your figures are presented in the best resolution possible and will be legible when reduced to their final size. And please respond to requests from the journal timeously. And if you won't be able to respond, just let them know in advance and they can plan around. And then I'm not sure, Kalani, do I have 1 more minute?
Yes, Doctor, please, 1 minute.
Okay, I just wanted to show you that it's not just the traditional PDF HTML files that can be produced and published. There are other file formats. This is a supplementary file that we published in 2016 that was linked to one of our articles on our YouTube channel. And then some journals publish audio summaries in addition to the article. And then I saw this very recently. This is animation that is embedded inside the PDF. So certain kinds of things that are easier to explain through a video than a figure or a table. This is possible for some journals, not our journal yet, but hopefully in the future. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry about my screen sharing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fick. Especially the last slide was very interesting. Definitely didn't want to miss that animation. It's quite interesting. So again, thank you very much for such an elaborate presentation and for leveraging your experience in understanding production and online publishing. So, and just, to get an understanding of what happens behind the scenes after your paper is accepted and being prepared for publication, and what role the author can play together with the journal, in terms of optimization. I think another well-established, issue is that most people, they don't realize the work that goes behind the scenes and the importance of quality control. And often authors will, even during proofreading, will get too excited and don't do due diligence with proofreading. Sometimes you send a paper and it's approved within hours. So it's very important sometimes to make sure that you validate if or what is outlined or what is on the proof of your article, the version, well, the first version of what your article will look like once published, it's exactly, or it was well, translated from the manuscript, the Word document onto the PDF. So thank you very much, Dr. Fick. So for the panelists, we wanted to, I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to take questions, but I see most questions right now that they do not relate to production. So I will advise that we again hold those for the Q&A session where we'll engage directly based on those questions with the panelists. So for our fourth speaker, we wanted to have someone who will speak and represent emerging scholars as one of the speakers to share their experiences to allow for a more relatable engagement for our target audience, which is mostly emerging scholars. So our next speaker is Dr. Emmanuel Quaye. Dr. Emmanuel Quaye is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Witwatersrand Business School. Dr. Emmanuel Silva Quaye's research focuses on consumer behavior with strategic marketing implication. He pays particular attention to cross-cultural consumer behavior, branding, digital marketing, philanthropy, and social consumption practices. Emmanuel's work has been published in marketing and social science journals, Journal of Global Marketing, Electronic Commerce Research and Application, Journal of Financial Services Marketing, Social Marketing Quarterly, and Journal of Brand Management. Emmanuel's currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Wits Business School, and he holds a PhD in marketing, MSc in marketing and brand management from the Norwegian School of Economics, and a master's in developmental and psychology, again from Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Emmanuel has taught marketing strategy, research methods, and intermediate to advanced qualitative methods at graduate level at Wits Business School. As a research associate at the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, CAPSI, Emmanuel's research focuses on psychology of giving, technology-mediated donations behavior, and circular economy engagement. Dr. Quaye will be discussing challenges and opportunities for the new researchers and them the publishing journey. You may begin, Dr. Quaye, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon once again. And first, I want to take the opportunity to thank all the, those behind the program and also my colleagues this afternoon. I think it's a very great opportunity to be called amongst very leading scholars to share some of my thoughts on challenges and opportunities for new researchers, the publishing journey. And I think that my focus will be mainly challenges as an emerging scholar, and I'll draw my own experiences and some of the things that I have engaged in, and also mainly give some few tips on how to navigate, the landscape as an emerging scholar. Yeah, so that'll be my approach. So an emerging researcher, according to the European Educational Research Association, is someone who within 5 years of completing a PhD or during their doctoral or master's studies or research career is interested in broadening research training and production of scholarly works. Somebody who is interested in exchanging experiences and ideas about research, developing research projects in collaboration with others, and lastly, actively participating in a research community for emerging scholars. So the key word here is somebody within 5 years. So if within 5 years of your PhD, you are interested in academic work, scholarly production, you're interested in collaboration, you're interested in all these things, including teaching and of course, service, you are classified as an emerging scholar. So I'm sure majority of us here fit within that bracket. Now, I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges and what you need to do. So in the interest of time, I'll move a little bit faster, but during the Q&A session, I can answer the questions. The first thing that I want to address is that as a researcher, you need to define your core identity. Who do you want to be and what do you want to be known for? So many a times you see that many researchers, especially young researchers, start out without answering that question of what kind of researcher do I want to become? You know, an established scholar, what kind of trajectory I want to see for myself developing into this academic space. So knowing who you are, your identity is very, very crucial for so that you gain the respect and, you know, you are accorded the right, the right respect and honor that you need. So identity is very important. What kind of research do you want to become? Researcher. And the second thing that I thought I should focus on is ability to do rigorous research. And by rigor, I mean the quality of being extremely thorough and careful in your theoretical, conceptual, and methodological writings and engagement. So most of the time, and I think my colleagues have mentioned how to publish, but most of the time you realize that many of emerging scholars are not rigorous. They are not extremely careful. They don't cover all the do's and don'ts of research. So that is something to think about. How do I be rigorous when you are doing theory of economic development? What kind of models are there? In your writings, in your publications, have you covered all of them? How thorough and careful have you become in your writings? And then the third thing that is a major challenge for emerging scholars is methodological and analytical skills. So the competency in a collection of quantitative and qualitative toolkits is very important. So if you're an economist, if you're a marketing scholar, if you are a social scientist, you need to be very acquainted in methods, including data collection and analyzing data, because that will set you up for future research, especially when you are done with your PhD and you want to begin writing and you want to become, you know, somebody very important in your field. So methodological collection of all kinds of skills, all kinds of analysis, all kinds of tools, because that is what is going to get you through the top journals. And so we don't have to settle for less. We don't have to do, you know, very poor work. We need to be very thorough, and it takes time, it takes training, it takes effort. And also writing. Writing is part of the academic, you know, journey. You need to write well. You need to learn how to write. You need to develop a pattern of writing. Writing should become part of your daily routine or weekly routine. And so that is something as an emerging scholar, you need to be aware. If you don't know how to write, then you need to develop those skills. It's very crucial, even as we develop as to become established scholars. Writing, effective writing, consistent writing skills. And the other point that I want to also emphasize is planning and time management. Many a times we as emerging scholars, we just allow things to go. We don't plan our career. You wait until last minute and you realize that time have caught up with you. After 5 years of your PhD, you have not published anything, or you've not really done any good work. and you are engaged in teaching and admin, before you know, you are 10 years and you have not done anything. It is important that we plan our careers very well. We plan our careers very well right from the outset, how many papers you want to publish, who you want to collaborate with, and those type of things. And I also mentioned something called promotable activities, being engrossed in one thing over the other. And in academia, there's a saying that you publish or perish. Your overriding motivation should be publication and other things. You don't have to engage in unnecessary admin work, which takes you away from the core responsibility 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. What will make you being promoted is your publication. And in fact, quality publications. All other things will not really matter. It doesn't matter how good you are at teaching. If you don't publish, you will be sidelined. So that's something to learn and to think about as an emerging scholar, so that you don't lose sight of what you must focus on. And the other thing is you need to learn to crawl before you learn to walk. And that's something that I really learned from the beginning. When you are embarking on publications, it's very difficult. You will get a lot of rejections. So it is important to start from, very, easy to get through, but fairly decent publication outlets. Once you see that you're getting one publication, two publications, it boosts your confidence, and you gradually will move on to other higher, rank publications. And there are so many, the Australian Dean's list of publications. There's the British CAPS list. You want to get hold of them. You want to paste it on your, desk and see which ones you can easily get through to before you think about the other thing. And then there's also the question of quantity versus quality of publications. Quantity is where you just move around and you publish in any outlet, but quality is respectable outlets. I think that many of us lose sight because we want to get jobs, because we want to get promoted. We mostly go for quantity, but I think a fair balance is very good. So find a way, but over and above, make sure that you are known for something, and make sure that quality is your, overriding objective. Always go for quality. Always look for outlets that will help you to build your career. And then there's another thing that I also found, that you need, as a matter of urgency from the outset, to break away from the shadows of your supervisors. Develop your own independence and critical thinking from the outset. Many people find it so hard to break away from the influence of their supervisors. They want their supervisors to endorse ideas. They want their supervisors to do analysis for them. They want their supervisors to do so many things for them. If you did not learn how to do some of these things, writing, analysis, rigorous work, even after your PhD or your master's, you need to take it on yourself to develop your own independence. You need to find effective ways of working on your own, developing ideas and writing all by yourself. But you need mentors as well. So find a good balance between your independence and also getting mentoring. You cannot do it all by yourself. There are some outlets you will never be able to publish in them. But if you get a good supervisor, a good mentor who is able to guide you and lead you to shape your ideas, you can get in. So break away from the shadow of your supervisor. Be independent. Be on your own. Identify ideas, think about them, develop them, and write on those ideas. And the other thing that I want to say is that it's very important to build your network, both local and international research network. Engage with established researchers. Recently, I just wrote to one woman in the US that I've been citing her work so much. And apparently she was interested in collaborating with people from Africa. And by so doing, we now have developed a work that we will be publishing in a very decent, outlet. So network, collaboration is very important. Don't be a local champion, as we will say. Go out there, attend conferences, meet people, share your ideas, collaborate, and build yourself. It will pay off in the end. And then lack of funding is also another important area that we will always battle with, but it's something that you have to, think about and see how you can get funding for your work, but also developing effective life and family balance as an emerging scholar. Is my time up?
You have 1 minute left.
I have 1 minute left. Okay, to be an effective researcher, emerging scholar, you have to continuously develop yourself, always start new projects, take advantage of digital platforms for self-development. And this is very important. Many of us start out not knowing so many things, but as you go along, continuously build yourself. Sometimes you have to go for seminars, you have to pay for certain courses online just to get the skills that will get you out there. I've talked about collaboration, and also you need to get to want to publish. You need to have this burning desire to want to publish in important outlets, and also build your your interest as widely as possible. Develop skills for generating funding, and then as much as if possible, try to get opportunity to participate in visiting scholarship programs, either locally or overseas. They say travel and see. And I believe if you do that, you will. Please, can you give me 3 minutes to just finish up? I have some few thoughts that I will share. And if so that even if the questions don't come, that will be fine. Okay? Just 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
And then is that fine? I'll be done in 3 minutes. All right. So in ending, what are the benefits of being an academic? What is the value? Teaching, mentoring students, you are able to follow your own passion. There's a sense of autonomy. You have freedom over your own time. You have opportunity to collaborate both locally and internationally. Once you become an established scholar and a professor, nobody can fire you unless you engage in a behavior that is inappropriate. There's also long-term impact. People know you for something, and you can travel widely overseas and around the world. And I just want to encourage my emerging academics that let's keep on pushing, but overall, let's do quality work. Let's do quality work. In the end, you have to have fun. Don't lose sight of where you are going. Your aim is to be established in a field. You have to burn the midnight candle. You have to sacrifice, build your own influence in a specific domain. And then lastly, publish, because it is what will pay off. All the rest doesn't matter. And my last comment is that somebody said that the master economist must possess a rare combination of gifts. He must be mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher in some degree. He must understand symbols and speak in words. He must understand the present in the light of the past for the purpose of the future. No part of man's nature or his institution must lie outside his regard. And that is being a complete set of an academic, yearning to produce something of impact, burning the midnight candle, going through rejections, but never losing sight of what you have to, accomplish as an emerging scholar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Quaye. Excuse me. That was, thank you really, very much. For your presentation, I believe it resonated with most of the audience. And so I will take a quick question after Dr. Emmanuel's presentation before we go to the Q&A session. So we are left, now it's 20 minutes past 3, so that means we are left with 10 minutes for both the closing remark, the summation, and recommendation, and then the closing remarks. So let me just quickly jump on to the questions on the comment section. We'll start.
Olani, I've
Yes.
tried answering most of them live. So if you can see, I've been typing responses to some of the questions as they come along.
Thank you very much, Doctor. If anyone can point out which question hasn't been answered, then we can just quickly come on to those ones. So there's a question from for Dr. Quaye. I'm agreeing about breaking away others. It can be argued that what is being said has already been said. Concur about collaboration too. I have reached out to a colleague. I guess it's more of a comment than a question. So if there aren't any unanswered or unattended questions, then I think I will give Prof. Imhotep to proceed with summation and synthesizing of the key points. So now I would like to introduce Prof. Imhotep. They'll give us the closing remarks. I will not get into Prof. Imhotep's bio. It's going to take the whole time that's left. Prof is chief editor-in-chief of the International Review of Philanthropy and Social Investment Journal, and he's also, is also an emeritus editor-in-chief for the African Review of Economics and Finance. Prof. Imhotep Ilokatete is a professor of finance at the Wits University of Witwatersrand. So I think I will stop there, Prof, in the interest of time, and please take your time.
Thank you very much, Olani, and thank you, all of you, for joining us in this afternoon's discussion. I've really personally learned a lot from all the speakers. This world of publishing, it's always a world that you continue to learn and invent and reinvent yourself. So all the speakers this afternoon, and sorry to our dear sister, Sara, Amin, to her son. We wish him the best of luck and speedy recovery. And to all the speakers this afternoon, really pleased with what you have all covered in this session. Just to sum it up, we have been looking at the journal editing process, the production processes, how to prepare a manuscript for submission, how to be successful in getting your work published. And the last speaker really reflected on some of the challenges that young researchers do face in attempt to put their work out for publication. So these are really very good thoughts for all of us to take home and digest and really work on. And I wish you the best of luck in your endeavors. Just as way of pointing out the key message that emerged from here is that rejection is one of the words that I always say you will have to get used to if you want to stay in this business. Rejection and rejection and rejection will continue to be part of the game of academic publishing. At this stage of being in the game for nearly 2 decades, we still get rejected for submitting articles to journals, sometimes not because of the scientific misapplication of methods, but simply because rejection happens. So as an emerging scholar, you need to get used to this word and know that when your article is rejected, as Professor Jones rightly pointed out, this is not personal. You have to take the comments and rework and work again. Our sister talked to us about the production process specifically at the South African Journal of Science. And each journal will really have its own methods and ways of typesetting, proofreading, and disseminating the content. So paying attention to detail is really, really key. These days, many authors, especially young ones, and increasingly many established authors do not take time to even get to know the journal in which they are submitting their work. So it's important to get to know, first of all, the name of the journal. Sometimes you get submissions from people, they just submit the article. And in my case, I edit about 5 journals at the same time. So if you just simply submit an article without going to the journal website to even find out the aims and objectives of the journal and finding out which of the journals you are submitting, you get a desk rejection. So these are some of the reasons why emerging scholars obviously get desk rejections and sometimes very painful rejections, which can be avoided. So please take time, get to know the journal in which you are submitting your manuscripts. Ensure that you have prepared the manuscript according to the journal's instructions to authors, and each journal has this information. In fact, I've just checked the South African Journal of Science, and they have gone into the details of even putting all the protocols of, the editorial policies, plagiarism policies, policies on retracting your article, and so many, many other things. So please, acquaint yourself with the journals that you want to submit your manuscripts, prepare the manuscript very well, seek professional proofreading and editorship help if you know that your language skills is not well developed. And sometimes it's important to read again and reread your manuscript to ensure that you weed out all unnecessary and avoidable mistakes before you submit. Also, the scientific merit of your work is very important consideration in becoming successful in this area. Emmanuel pointed this out so strongly. Your work has to be scientifically grounded, methodologically sound. The conceptual and the contextual issues have to be all very clear and well presented. And most often, I believe that young and emerging researchers simply do not take the time to do good research. And I would say that this is also becoming a feature of the academic industry generally, that the standards are falling. So in the past, it used to take anywhere between 6 months to a year or 3 years to get a paper out. But these days, people can hurriedly just put anything together in a matter of days and want it to get out and get published. So please spend some good quality time to make sure that you have grounded your work and make sure you have senior colleagues, mentors, and guardians to check your work. Wow.
Thank you very much, Prof. Imhotep. I'm not sure if you got disconnected. I would just like to quickly take this opportunity to recognize our director at CAPSI, Prof. Peginkosi Moyo. I'm not sure if he wants to say maybe a few words for 10 seconds. If not, then...
I think you are muted.
Yeah, sorry. I lost connection for a few minutes, so I'm back now. So just to summarize, get to know the journal, make sure that you have... sorry, I'm done. I'm just done. Get to know the journal and do quality work. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you very much, Prof. Imhotep. So I will just, again, let me take this opportunity to thank our speakers and the audience for supporting this initiative. We hope you gained invaluable information and knowledge through the session. Lastly, let me thank our CAPSI team for their assistance in making this webinar possible. We hope to see you in all our upcoming events of the series. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day.